Hello student, welcome to Massive Open online course on Indian economy. Today I am going to discuss the module entitled Privatization and Disinvestment in India. After completing this module, you are able to learn the concept of privatization and disinvestment as well as different forms of or pattern of privatization. This module also helpful to understand privatization and disinvestment policy in India, and you will also able to learn the evaluation or the phase by phase transformation of the privatization policy or displacement policy, disinvestment policy in India. The present module consists with 8 sections. Section 1 introduces the theme, whereas Section 2 points out the concept of privatization and disinvestment or different forms of disinvestment, and Section 3 deals with the main objectives of privatization. Section 4 is the modes of privatization and disinvestment, and Section 5 is disinvestment policy. After that, Section 6 presents a brief evaluation of the privatization policy, and Section 7 is the critical evaluation of the privatization and disinvestment policy in India, and finally Section 8 makes some concluding observations. Privatization is a process of transformation of the public sector enterprises into the private entities, and disinvestment is the means of this transformation. Disinvestment actually means the selling of the stake or share of the public sector enterprises to the private partner. In India, this privatization process or disinvestment process was started in the year 1991 as a part of the economic reform policy, and during that time the then finance minister Dr. Manmohan Singh was adopted the new economic policy or economic reforms, and this privatization and disinvestment is a part of this new economic policy or economic reforms in India. And here the main objective is to overcome the financial deficit or the burden of the government. And this privatization also aims to improve the efficiency, profitability, and competitiveness in whole of the economy, not only in the public sector. And in India, this privatization policy evolved time to time, and the pattern of privatization also transformed from one phase to another phase. There are different rationalities behind the privatization policy in India, and these rationalities include to improve the performance and the competitiveness of the public sector enterprises, reduce fiscal burden and debt, generate revenue for public expenditure, attract private capital and technology to the economy, and promote market discipline and efficiency, and enhance consumer welfare and choice. During the initial time period, 1991, government noticed that a number of public sector enterprises operate with a huge loss. Therefore, to increase the efficiency, competitiveness, profitability, government introduced or adopted this privatization and disinvestment policy. This is the argument of the policymaker in respect of the privatization or disinvestment policy in our country. Present module deals with different aspects of privatization and disinvestment in India. This is the section 2 that help us to understand the basic concept of privatization by the means of different forms of the privatization. To understand different forms of the privatization, here we considered 4 Ds. These 4 Ds help us to understand different form of the privatization. First D is for the delegation, second D is for divestment, third D is for displacement, and 4D is for the disinvestment. That is delegation, divestment, displacement, and disinvestment. These 4 are the different forms of the privatization in our country. Now let us define these four concepts one after one. First of delegation. Delegation means that the government retains the ownership and responsibility of an enterprise but delegates its daily operation and delivery of products or services to a private company or private entities through a contract or lease or grant. The state remains an active participant in the delegation process and monitors the performance of the private company. Disinvestment. This is another form of the privatization. Disinvestment means that the government sells a majority stake of an enterprise to one or more private companies while retaining the minority stake or share or no stake at all. The government surrenders its control and influence over the enterprise and allows it to operate independently in the market. The third form of privatization is the displacement. It means that a government deregulates a sector and allows private companies to enter and compete with the public enterprises. The private companies gradually displace the public enterprises by offering better quality, efficiency, and innovation. And here the government reduces its role and intervention in the sector and lets market forces determine its outcome. And the fourth form of the privatization is disinvestment. It means that the government sells a portion or whole of the public enterprise to private parties through public auction and strategic sales. The government also withdraws its investment and involvement from the enterprise completely and transfers all its assets, liabilities, and risks to the private buyers. In our country, the privatization and disinvestment, these two terms are used interchangeably, but actually privatization means transformation of the public sector enterprises to the private entities, whereas disinvestment is the means of the transformation that implies the selling of the government share or government stake of the public sector enterprises to the private partners or to the private entrepreneur. And both the strategies have been adopted by successive governments since 1991 as a part of the economic reforms agenda and with varying degrees of success and opposition. Now we come to the objectives of this privatization or disinvestment in India. During the period of economic reforms or during the early period of economic reforms, particularly in the 1991, a number of public sector enterprises in our country were operated with huge loss, and there was also the problems that were evident related with the inefficient management, related with the lack of the competitiveness, or related with the slow progress of the production system. Therefore, government forced to transform this public sector into the private hand, and government put forward a number of objectives for this privatization or disinvestment process. These objectives or privatization are related with to reduce the fiscal burden on the government by cutting down subsidies and losses incurred by the inefficient public sector enterprises, to improve the performance and competitiveness of public sector enterprises by introducing market discipline, professional management, and accountability, to raise resources for financing social sector programs, infrastructure development, and debt reduction, to encourage wider participation of private investors, especially small shareholders and employees, in the ownership of the public sector enterprises. Whatever may be the argument in favor of the public sector enterprises put forward by the government, the main point is to overcome the burden of the government, to reduce the subsidies in respect of the public sector enterprises. And this privatization process is also expected to bring more accountability, transparency, professionalism, and profitability to the public enterprises and services. Privatization is also expected to create more opportunities for the private investment, innovation, entrepreneurship in various sectors of the economy. However, the objectives of the privatization have not been fully realized in our country due to different reason. Reason for one of the reason is the opposition, and due to the mismanagement or appropriate methods of the transformation from a public sector enterprise to the private sector enterprise. Now we come to the section 4. It deals with the modes or different methods of privatization in our country. Here government introduced or adopted different methods of transformation of the public sector enterprises in our country. These methods include strategic sale, public offer, asset sale, and lease. Now we can discuss these alternative methods of privatization one after one. A strategic sale involves the selling of substantial portion, that is more than 50% of the government share of a public sector enterprise, to a strategic partner who can bring in technology, capital, and management expertise to improve the public sector enterprise. And another form of the privatization is public offer. This involves selling a part of the government share in a public sector enterprise through an initial public offering or follow-on public offering in the stock market. Asset sale is also another mode of privatization. This involves the selling the assets or business units of a public sector enterprise to private buyers through auctions and tenders. And finally, lease. This involves leasing out of the assets or operation of a public sector enterprises to a private entity for fixed period with an option to buy at the end of the lease term. In our country, the main form of the privatization is being formed by the strategic sale. Now we come section 5, which is the disinvestment policy. As regards the disinvestment policy or privatization policy in our country, we can argue to that, yes, there are different policies and measures adopted by the government, and these policies and measures also changed from one time period to another time period. But the main purpose of this disinvestment policy is related with how the government able to disinvest the public sector enterprises, and how the government able to sell the public sector enterprises, or able to sell the shares of the public sector enterprises to increase the efficiency, productivity, and profitability of the public sector enterprises. Here the government had adopted different approaches towards the investment over the years, such as minority stake sale, strategic sale with transfer of management control, initial public offerings, offer for sale, buyback of shares, exchange traded funds. Side by side, it is also true that the government has also set up a different commission or agency to form the disinvestment policy in our country. And here we noticed that time to time government also changed this organization for the better implementation of the disinvestment policy. In our country, since the 1991, we have noticed different form of institution or mechanism to facilitate and oversee the disinvestment process, which includes the Disinvestment Commission for the period 1996 and 2004, Department of Disinvestment for the period 1999 and 2016, Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, DIPAM, for the period 2016 to date, and core group of secretaries on disinvestment, interministerial group, and finally the Niti Aayog. And at present, the disinvestment policy has been framed by DIPAM, Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, and in their policy they have considered two aspects. One is advise the government in for the disinvestment, and another is the strategy or works for the disinvestment of the public sector enterprises. And this DIPAM advises the government on matters related to financial restructuring of the public sector enterprises by attracting investment through capital markets, addressing issues such as capital restructuring, dividend, bonus, share, etc., and managing the government's investment in equity, including its disinvestment in the public sector enterprises. Whereas uh, this Department of Investment and Public Asset Management works in consultation with other various stakeholders such as administrative ministers, Niti Aayog, CGD, CCEA, SEBI, Stock Exchange, merchant bankers, etc., to identify public sector enterprises for disinvestment and decide on the mode of sale, percentage of share to sold, and method for the valuation of the public sector enterprises. Whatever may be the methods or organization has been adopted in our country in respect of the disinvestment policy, the disinvestment policy still suffered a number of problems, and these problems are related with lack of political consensus and opposition from the trade unions, employees, and civic societies, lack of transparency and accountability in the disinvestment process, undervaluation of the public sector enterprise and loss of national assets, adverse impact on employment, social obligation, and strategic sectors, lack of proper utilization of disinvestment process, and failure to achieve disinvestment targets. A number of challenges and criticism faced by the disinvestment authority in respect of the disinvestment of the public sector enterprises in our country, which is the major concern in our country. Now we come to the section 6, which deals with the evaluation of the privatization and disinvestment in our country. Evaluation means the phase by phase development or transformation of privatization and disinvestment policy in our country. Here the entire period has been classified into 4 phases. The phase 1 is the early period that covered the period 1991 to 1999. That is first decade since the economic reforms or since the introduction of the privatization policy. In this phase marked the beginning of the economic reforms and the liberalization in India, and it opened up the various sectors of the private participation and foreign investment. The government adopted a policy of minority disinvestment, that means selling less than 51% shares of the selected public sector enterprises. And the industrial policy statement of 1991 identified 31 public sector enterprises for disinvestment and raised rupees 3038 crore till 1996. And in the year 1996, government established disinvestment commission to advise and monitor the process of disinvestment. However, the disinvestment was often done at low price and without transferring the management control to the private partners. And these forms of disinvestment is treated as the minority disinvestment. This minority disinvestment not only related with the relatively lower share of disinvestment of the public sector enterprises, as well as relatively more control of the public sector enterprises by the government. Phase 2. Phase 2 is related with the period 1999 to 2004. This is the second phase of the privatization in our country, and here the government adopted a more aggressive approach of strategic sale. The strategic sale includes sale of the strategic public sector enterprises as well as the sale of the strategic share of the public sector enterprises, and which is more than 50%. Side by side, the strategic sale also involve the sale of the public sector enterprises to a strategic partners who is effective or who will be effective to run the public sector enterprises by using his experts in this particular sector. And this phase witnessed a shift from minority investment to strategic sale, that is selling more than 50% share along with management control to the private partner. And this was done mainly for loss making or non-strategic public sector enterprises such as hotels, airlines and telecom companies. The government also set up disinvestment commission during this phase to advise on privatization policy, and government also introduced cross-holding among the public sector enterprise and buyback of shares by the public sector enterprise themselves. Some notable strategic sale during this second phase were Balco, Hindustan Zinc, IPCL, VSNL and Maruti Suzuki. And during this phase, government earned rupees 33,657 crore from the disinvestment of the public sector enterprises. Phase 3 is for the period 2004 to 2014, and this third phase of privatization begins in the year 2004 with the government introduced the new policy framework that classified the public sector enterprise into the strategic and non-strategic sector. And here government decided to retain the majority stake and management control only in strategic sector such as defense, atomic energy and railways, while allowing greater private participation in the non-strategic sectors. And during this period, government able to disinvestment at the extent of rupees 1.2 lakh crore. The phase 4 that covered the period 2014 to 2024, this period witnessed an acceleration of the disinvestment in our country, and here government expanded the scope of strategic sale to include profitable as well as loss-making public sector enterprises. And in the current phase, after 2020, here the privatization is marked by a bold resolve to privatize all public sector enterprises in non-strategic sectors, as announced by the finance minister in her 2021-22 budget speech. The government has also invited bids for the IDBI bank to public sector banks and general insurance company. The government aims to raise 1.75 lakh crore from the disinvestment proceeds in 2021-22. Section C deals with the evaluation of the privatization and disinvestment policy in our country. Here the mixed reaction from the various stakeholders. Different stakeholders also criticized the disinvestment as well as privatization policy in our country. They have also criticized the methods of the privatization or disinvestment in our country. And this criticism includes the concentration of economic power in few private sectors, the faulty methodology of disinvestment, the short-run fiscal consideration, and transparency, consultation, and regulation of the public sector enterprises into the few hands. In conclusion, we can say that the process of privatization or the method of privatization or the panacea to solve all the problem in our country. Government forced to sell the public sector enterprises because government not able to properly manage the public sector enterprises, government not able to increase the efficiency of the public sector enterprises. Therefore, government forced to sell the public sector enterprises. But after the selling public sector enterprises, there is also the problem that we are noticed during the time period, the problem of economic concentration with few hands, as well as the controlling power of the government. The government are not able to control the economic scenario in our country. Therefore, here we can suggest that the balanced approach of the public sector companies, or the balanced approach for the strategic sale of the public sector enterprises, which is related with the privatization process or disinvestment process in our country, is efficient to overcome this problem in the our near future. Therefore, we can also argue that the privatization process must be transparent and able to overcome its limitation for the inclusive growth or inclusive development in our country. Thank you.